All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been going over the PowerPoint slides for Murox ASP.NET 4.6 with C# 2015 6th edition for the AWD1111 Web Databases or .NET Framework with Web Databases class on ASP.NET. We're in the middle of Chapter 17 of 25 of our textbook, and we're about to go over this category maintenance application. This application is a variation of the category maintenance application we used in Chapter 14. It uses a grid view control to let the user update and delete category rows along with a details view control to insert new category rows. Both the grid view and data view controls are bound to a single object data source control, but the details view control is used only for insert, so it isn't used to display or to update or delete existing rows. The table that's in this figure right there, that table shows the public methods that are provided by the category DB class. All right, so the default ASPX in the book is shown on pages 622 and 623. In the first part of this, you can see the ASPX code for the grid view. All right, so you can see how everything is set up for the grid view. That grid view again displays the category rows. The columns collection includes the three bound field columns named category ID, short name, and long name. Next, we see the setup for the object data control. All right. It names category DP as the data access class and category as the business class. So the code behind file you see here. This is figure 1714 that's on page 625, has got the default ASPX CS and the category CS. The category DB is on page 627 and 629. So this figure starts to show the code behind files. This again is the code behind file for the default. The file consists of methods that handle the exceptions that might be raised and the concurrency errors that might occur when the object's data source is updated, deleted, or inserted. The first method that's here is executed after the data source is updated or deleted. This particular method retrieves the return value from the update or delete using the return value of the E argument and assigns it to the affected rows property. You must do this because the affected rows property isn't set automatically. The second method that's here is executed after the grid view control is updated. That happens after the data source has been updated. This method checks the exception property of the E property, of the E argument rather, to determine if an exception has been thrown, and if it has, an error message is displayed. If an exception did not occur, then this method continues by checking the affected rows argument. Remember that if you attempted to do an update and it returns 0, that doesn't necessarily mean that what you typed in was wrong. That means that what you typed in didn't meet any criteria. It's as though we had a database that had people's salaries. And let's say that the salaries that they had were between $50,000 and $100,000. And I asked for a listing of all salaries that were, I said anybody who's making $1 million and or more should get a 10% raise. Well, if it returns 0 for affected rows, that doesn't mean it's an error in my code. It means there were no records that met that particular condition. Now, the next method is here, that's here on the top of this particular slide, is similar, except it handles the row deleted event. Again, it checks for exception and concurrency errors. And the fourth method that's shown there is executed after a row is inserted. It checks whether an exception has occurred and it responds accordingly. Note here that concurrency checking isn't necessary because a concurrency error cannot occur for an insert. Finally, the last two things that are in here create error messages that are displayed if an error indeed does occur. This code illustrates just one way that you can provide for concurrency errors. Another way that this could be done would be to write update and delete methods so they throw an exception if a concurrency error occurs. All right, before we talk about the category class, let's run this and take a look at it and see what happens. And for whatever reason, my system is running remarkably slow this morning. So while it thinks about it, let's jump back. What you see on the screen here is the category business class. Required each property that's in here is defined with both a get and a set accessor. Remember, there are three properties, and those three properties are the category ID, the short name, and the long name. So each one has a getter and a setter. And again, you need to set that up by default. Did it come up yet? Oh, like I said, it's still either thinking about it. Yep, it's still loading. All right. So what you see on pages 627 and 629 are the category DB class that's used as the data access class for the application. Again, this class uses the data object and the data object methods to mark. So there's the data object. There's the data object methods, letting it know that this is for a select. Again, it's used it to mark the class as a data object class and to mark the methods as data object methods. The four public methods in this class provide for the select, the insert, the delete, and the update. These methods use standard ADO.NET code to access the database. And what does that mean? Well, there is a getCategories method that retrieves all the rows and all the columns from the category table in the Halloween database. To get a connection to the Halloween database, the getCategories method calls the private getConnectionString method, which gets the connection string from the web.config file. When the user clicks the insert button, the object data source executes the insert category method. One thing to note is that if you run the application that uses an object data source with debugging and an unhandled exception occurs, Visual Studio will immediately enter break mode and it won't allow you to go on. When the user clicks the delete button in the grid view control, the object data source executes the delete category method. This method also accepts a single parameter for a category object, which contains the values that were originally retrieved from the categories table: the ID, the short name, and the long name. They're assigned to parameters that are defined in the where clause of the delete. Note that this method returns an integer value. Now, you don't have to store the value that's returned in a variable. Instead, you can just return the value directly to the object data source. Then with the update category, that's again executed when the user clicks the update button. Like the delete, the update category returns an integer value that indicates the number of rows affected by the update operation. Again, you can choose this or use this to check for any possible concurrency errors. All right, did this come up yet? Okay, there we've got it. So again, you'll notice with the maintenance, as mentioned, we're using the grid view for our edit. There, we're in edit mode. And I'm not going to delete one. Well, let's put one in. So the category ID will be, let's put in stuff. All right. The short name will be stuff. And the long name will be some stuff. Now, if I click cancel, it'll just abort the operation. If I click insert, there it is. And since it is all done based on long name in alphabetic order, that's why it's in the order that it is. So I can come in here now, I can edit it to say some really cool stuff. And then I can update it. All right, I can come in here and I can edit it. And I can say some super cool stuff. No, I don't want to do that, so I can cancel that edit and it goes back. And I can delete. So I've shown you the operation. So again, this is set up very similarly to what's in Chapter 14. The difference is, since we're using an object data source, it sounds, when you hear this, you may think to yourself, well, I'm never going to use this. It's a lot more work. Yes, it is. But it's giving you much more control over how things are handled. All right. Okay, so we're up to how to use paging and sorting with object data sources. That's the last part of the chapter. So I will come back with that lecture very shortly.